and so forth. And if they don't have that will to say, I don't want to be kept that way, because that can go to unbelievable expense.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you know, and you know what the outcome will be.
Right.
You know, so somebody could have to make that decision, and that's up to that person what they would want if they would be in that situation.
Right. It's about planning. I think if you plan properly, having a living will is a key part of that planning. You name your wishes. You name any other specifics that you really want, whether it's artificial feeding, whether it's resuscitation, whether it's issues regarding pain and suffering and you don't want such medication, whether it's prolonging the life. So those are the issues that we've dealt with from a legal perspective, and those are the issues that we really strongly recommend anyone over the age of 18 to really think about this issue and really to have preparation and planning in terms of their families and their own life.
Well, you know, people sometimes think that rich people should have wills. They don't consider themselves rich in a sense, you know. And so consequently, they don't think that paying insurance or things like that, even having life insurance, less more, a living will. And I think that the common, ordinary person should be, as we're doing today, be made, get knowledgeable about having these kind of things. And because they have accumulations, they have homes to be used. They have all kinds of artwork and things like this. In fact, I know in my own way, I have even designated what piece of artwork I would want to go to each child. So no one's pulling at the same piece of artwork, or even things like that. That's simple, you know, artwork. But I'm talking about homes and properties people have owned and things like this.
I agree. I think oftentimes a client walks into our offices and the ordinary common client, I think they need these kind of planning more than others. If you look at a will, for example, a will is also another document that gives you planning, what in your case, Dr. Deeds, what artwork to which individual. I think in a younger family with children particularly, you need to think about the guardian issue, because if you don't and something should happen to that young family, then the courts are involved. The court is going to appoint a guardian, and there are additional costs with that. If you have young children, that's a very important issue to think about as young parents. So will, among other things, of distributing assets, it's about family and planning and what you really want. And I think on a case-by-case basis, each individual have each circumstances that's really different. So we strongly recommend that these young family, in addition to living wills, when they start to think about this, it really goes together. The living will is a document that you should have today, and it's effective today. Whereas a will is a document that sort of comes into activated when someone passes on.
Right.
So they really go together, and together with the healthcare proxy, I think it's a good time to bring that in. A healthcare proxy is basically a document that designates an individual to act on your behalf. In other words, if a client comes in and said, you know, what would happen if I don't have the mental capacity to make these decisions in terms of my medical treatment? The answer is, well, if you don't have a proxy or an attorney, in fact, to act on your behalf, then the hospital and the doctors and the court system would take over.
Oh, yes.
On the other hand, if you have previously designated an individual to act on your behalf, it could be a friend, more likely your spouse, a family member, or even your doctor. That individual, that proxy already knows what your wishes are, and the chances is higher that your wishes will be carried out.
Now, when you talk about a will, a lot of times folks think that when you speak to a lawyer, it's going to cost them an arm and a leg to have these things done. But cost has really nothing to do with this when you think about it, or what it's going to save at the end, although the cost is not that exhaustive anyhow, you know. So the cost of making a living will, is that a large cost usually?
You want?
Sure. When clients come to us, our office is always on a free consultation basis. They walk in and we discuss these issues that are so critical to their life. If they took that initial step to walk into our office or contact our office, I think they have taken the most important first step. After the discussion and addressing their issues, oftentimes we find that the cost comes out to a very modest amount. From a couple of $100 to maybe a few $100. They could have a living will in place, a healthcare proxy in place, a last will and testament in place, and most of all, have access to perhaps a legal lawyer or a law firm where they could continually discuss these kind of issues as they move forward, as the circumstances change.
Sure, sure.
That is wonderful. You know, because in my practice, I can tell you, not many people knew about a living will. You know, and that even goes for the doctors not knowing much about living wills. And I think that the doctors should be aware to advise their patients to get a living will. You know, and so I'm speaking to doctors now in the community, and I hope this program will make the folks relate to their doctors and their doctors relate to them about why this is so important, because we are at that end point where we see the patient suffering, and should we pull the plug, or do they want the plug to be in while the line is down and the brain is dead? You know, and what that does is the cost of that is such a large amount of money when you think about it too. Medical care today, you'd be surprised, and people get all emotional about it. They say somebody lasted 3 years in coma. Hey, that's only one out of millions of people, you know. So you can't judge it on one person living, you know, lasting for 3 years on a respiratory equipment.
Right. Sure. I mean, it all comes back to the planning cycle. That it's all about planning. And this document really gives the ability of that individual to have something planned and have a peace of mind. I think that's a good way to describe it. You may not need that document, but in the future, if you do need that document, you already thought about it. And the most critical thing that this document helps with is making the good decisions under duress, because people, when they are under a lot of duress and stress, it's very difficult to make those kind of decisions, and this document would permit you to do that.
And I think the other thing that Vincent mentioned too is the planning piece is really, really important, because in sitting down and actually planning, you know, your living will, you know, there are a few things that you want to take into consideration. I mean, for one, what you want to do is you want to, you know, just review, of course, you know, your religious preferences, because that's very important, actually. You know, as you know, some folks would opt not to actually receive a transfusion based on basically religious practices, and so we have a gamut of religious practices that are out there. So that's one thing that they should actually consider. They should also consider cost. That's important, you know, with respect to insurance again, you know, what the policy covers, what the policy doesn't cover. So that's something that should go into, you know, crafting the actual language of the actual living will. Another thing also is the actual age of the person who's going to create the living will as well. That's going to influence the language, because the wishes of a person who's older may be different than the wishes of a person who's younger. So that's another factor. Another important factor is basically the dynamics of the family. You know, you have to take that into consideration, because that is going to play a role. Another important thing, which is a process leading up to, again, the preparation, is the individual sitting down with their healthcare provider as well as their family members. You know, during that period or during that process, what they should do is they should articulate clearly what they wish. Because in doing that, for one, what you're doing is you're giving your healthcare provider notice, number one, which is important. But what's happening also is that you're also creating the language, and you're starting to think about the language. You're starting to think about those things with detail, and that's very, very important, because in a living will, you can't use general language, because if you use general language, the will may not be upheld. So what you have to do is you have to think about the process. You have to, you know, really flesh things out so that you know with specificity essentially what you want. And so that's something to take into consideration.
Something you said within what you were saying, Mr. Robertson, is that a lot of people, you know, they go to clinics these days. They see a different doctor each time. Not one of those doctors ever speak about what we're speaking about today, living will. And so they have medicine has changed so much.